In this lesson, we will review inverse operation and practice with the opposite or inverse of multiplication and division so that you can understand how to and prepare to find unknown values. You'll know you understand this if you can correctly solve for a variable in a one-step equation. So let's talk about what inverse operations are. Remember, inverse really means the opposite. Okay, so that's what we really need to think of. It's the opposite operation. And last time we talked about addition and subtraction. This time we're going to talk about multiplication and division. So the inverse or the opposite of multiplication is division. And the inverse or the opposite of division is multiplication. They kind of go hand in hand. So just remember that when we're working on our work today, we are really focusing on these two operations and the inverses of them. So when we have this problem, we have to know what 5D means. When you have 5D, what operation is being done here? Well, when you have a number next to a variable, it means multiplication. Now, when we have variables, we typically use the dot for multiplication, or you will see it in parentheses. We typically do not see that X used for it because it can look like a variable. But knowing that this does mean multiplication is super important. So remember, we're going to draw our line down the middle of the equal sign. Now, the opposite or the inverse of multiplication is division. So we are going to divide both sides by whatever's with that variable. So we have to look here. What's with the variable is 5. So I'm going to divide both sides by 5. Because what's happening here is we are creating a giant 1. Because anything times 1 is itself. So D times 1 equals D. And remember, we are trying to isolate our variables. We want to get D all by itself to figure out what it is. Okay, so 5/5 or 5 divided by 5 is 1. You're left with D. And then you do 30 divided by 5 is 6. So if you want to make sure, you can go back to your original problem. 5D or 5 times 6 is 30. And that's what we had for our original answer. So we know our answer is correct. Now here we have what looks like a fraction, x over 4. So we have to know, what does that mean? X over 4 is really the same thing as x divided by 4. Typically, when you see a problem, we usually write it like a fraction, so x over 4. Sometimes with formatting, you can also see it like x divided by 4. Okay, again, like last time, we want to create a giant 1. So another way to think of this as is x times something divided by 4. Well, if I'm creating a giant 1 here, my bottom number, my denominator is 4, my top number, my numerator has to be 4. So what I am really doing here is I am multiplying both sides by 4. Okay, so I'm going to say times 4. This will then create my giant 1 and times 4. So if you see here, even though it's a little crooked, it's like a giant 1. So that equals 1, and 1 times x is just x. So x equals 8 times 4 is 32. And then before you circle your answer, you can say, okay, let's go back to my original problem and let's plug in my answer. So let's say 32. Well, 32 divided by 4 is 8. And yes, that means my answer is correct. So x equals 32. Okay, so solving one-step equations using multiplication and division, we use inverse operation in order to solve. Remember, The inverse of multiplication is division. So if you see a problem like 8b equals 32 or 8 times b, in order to solve, you're going to divide on both sides. And then the inverse of division is multiplication. So if you see like m divided by 5, m over 5, in order to solve, you're going to multiply on both sides. All right, in order to make sure you are prepared and have some time to practice, I'd like you to go to IXL, please, and work on Z.8, solve one-step multiplication and division equations with whole numbers. Once you feel confident about that, you've reached either a 70 or above on your SMART score, make sure you go to 4.2 one-step equations, exit slip on Schoology.